The phone sits on the table. The screen is black. You check it again. Nothing. No notification. No missed call. Just the last message you sent, hanging in the void like a question mark that refuses to be answered. You start to replay the last conversation. You analyze the wording. You wonder if you used too many emojis, or if you were too available, or if you said something wrong. You tell yourself they are just busy. You tell yourself they lost their phone. But deep down, you know the truth. They are gone. And the hardest pill to swallow is that you pushed them away without saying a word. We tend to think of communication as something that happens with thumbs on a screen or voices in the air. But there is a silent, telepathic channel that is always open. It is the channel of need. When you sit around waiting for a text,
Checking your phone every 4 minutes, you are not just waiting. You are broadcasting a signal. You are emitting a frequency of desperation, anxiety, and lack. To the other person, this energy feels heavy. It feels suffocating. It feels like a psychic scream. They didn't ghost you because they are mean. They ghosted you because on an energetic level, you were shouting at them to fill a void inside of you, and they instinctively ran for the exit. They didn't leave because of what you typed. They left because of what you felt. Today, we are going to learn how to cut that cord of desperation. We are going to learn why the only way to get a message is to stop needing one. Chapter 1. The Invisible Tether. You sat there in the quiet of your room, and you thought you were alone.
You believed that your anxiety was contained within the walls of your skull. But that is the first mistake. Thoughts have weight. Emotions have a velocity. And fear is the loudest sound in the human experience. Let us return to that moment at 9:03 p.m. The message was delivered. You saw the receipt. Then came the silence. In that silence, you began to construct a narrative of abandonment. You checked the phone. You put it down. You picked it up again. You checked their social media to see if they were active. You calculated the time elapsed since their last interaction. You might think these were private actions. You might believe that because you did not send a double text or an angry follow-up, that you played it cool. You are wrong. There is an invisible tether that connects two people who have engaged in any form of intimacy.
It is not magic, and it is not mystical. It is a psychological bridge built on expectation and pattern recognition. When you are calm, that tether is slack. It hangs loosely between you and them, allowing for freedom of movement. It allows them to breathe. But the moment your anxiety spiked, that tether pulled tight. Imagine a rope tied around their waist. You are holding the other end. When you started spiraling into panic, you gripped that rope with both hands and you hauled it in. You pulled. You demanded reassurance without saying a word. You screamed for attention with your energy alone. You must understand that human beings are evolutionary masterpieces of threat detection. We are wired to sense danger. Desperation is a form of danger. It signals instability. It signals a demand that the other person cannot fulfill. Even across the distance of a city or a digital network, that tension travels. It manifests in the rhythm of your previous messages. It hides in the subtext of your casual jokes. It reveals itself in the speed of your replies. You were not just waiting for a text. You were waiting for oxygen. You made them your sole source of air, and they felt it. They may not have consciously thought that you were anxious. They likely did not sit down and analyze your psyche. Instead, they felt a sudden and inexplicable heavy weight. They felt the room shrink. They felt the air get thin. When you pulled on that invisible tether, their instinct was not to come closer. It was to brace themselves. It was to lean back. It was to sever the connection, to save their own balance. This is the physics of human interaction.
For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Your overwhelming push for closeness created their overwhelming need for distance. You screamed at them with your silence. You projected a need so profound that it became a repelling force. You turned your desire into a weapon and pointed it directly at them. Think of the way a drowning person grabs a lifeguard. They do not grab with love. They grab with terror. They climb on top of the Savior, pushing them down to get a breath. That is what your anxiety did. It tried to drown them, to keep you afloat. So they ghosted. They did not leave because they are cruel. They did not leave because you are unworthy. They left because the noise was too loud. They ran because the tether was cutting into their skin, and they had to break free to breathe again.
The tragedy of the invisible tether is that you created the very outcome you feared most. By clutching so tightly to the idea of them, you made it impossible for the reality of them to exist in your space. You sat there staring at 9:03 p.m., wondering why they would not speak to you. But the truth is that you were speaking so loudly they could not get a word in. You filled the space between you with your own fear until there was no room left for them to enter. To bring them back, or to bring anyone new into your life, you must learn to drop the rope. You must learn to let the tether hang slack. You must become a person who does not need to extract air from another human being. The silence is not your enemy. The silence is the space where they can choose to walk back toward you. But they will only do so if you stop pulling. If you want to understand more about the hidden mechanics of human connection and how to master your own narrative, then I invite you to join us here permanently. Please take a moment to click the subscribe button so we can continue this story together. Chapter 2. The Telepathic Scream. You are sitting in the stillness of your room, and you believe you are being silent. You believe that because you have not sent a second text and because you have not called. You are effectively hiding the storm raging inside your chest. You think you are playing the game. You think you are maintaining the mystery. But this is the great illusion of modern romance. You are not silent. You are deafening. This is the chapter where we dismantle the idea of hidden feelings. We must confront the reality of the telepathic scream.
When we speak of telepathy here, we are not discussing magic or the supernatural or any mystical force that binds the cosmos. We are talking about the acute, almost predatory sensitivity of the human animal. We are talking about the biological machinery that allowed our ancestors to sense danger in the tall grass before they could see it. That machinery is still active, but today it does not scan the savanna for predators. It scans your text messages for emotional, desperate need. Consider the moment you sent that last message. You likely agonized over it. You typed it out. You deleted it. You typed it again. You consulted a friend. You waited exactly 40 minutes because you read an article that said 40 minutes is the casual amount of time to wait. You engineered the perfect collection of words to sound breezy and unbothered. But here is the problem. The anxiety you felt while constructing that message did not vanish when you pressed send. It was encoded into the transmission. It lives in the subtext. It lives in the punctuation. It lives in the specific rhythm of your reply. Humans are incredibly sophisticated decoding machines. When that message lands on their phone screen, they do not just read the words, "Hey, how was your day?" They feel the weight behind the words. This is the telepathic scream. It is the invisible projection of your internal state.
Your anxiety acts like a high-pitched frequency that only the subconscious mind can hear. You might think you are merely asking a question, but to them, it feels like a demand. It feels like a hand reaching out of the screen to grab their collar. They read the text, and their stomach tightens. They might not even understand why. On the surface, your message was polite. It was kind. It was interested. Yet their instinct screams at them to run. Why does this happen? It happens because neediness is a heavy vibration. It signals a deficit. When you approach someone from a place of fear, terrified that they will leave, terrified that you are not enough, you turn that interaction into a transaction. You are not giving them attention. You are asking for reassurance. You are asking them to fill a void inside of you. That request is loud. It screams across the digital divide. It overrides the content of your message. You could be offering them $1 million, but if the emotional frequency behind the offer is desperate, they will recoil. Think about the invisible tether we discussed in the previous chapter. When you are anxious, you are pulling on that tether with both hands. You are checking your phone every 3 minutes. You are checking their social media to see if they are online. You are rehearsing the argument you will have if they do not reply soon. This mental energy is physically exhausting for you, but it is also palpable to them. We often pretend that communication is just the exchange of data. We pretend it is just logic and syntax. It is not. Communication is the transfer of emotional states. When you are calm, grounded, and secure in your own value, your communication feels light. It feels like an open door. The other person feels free to come and go. There is no pressure. However, when you are in the grip of the telepathic scream, your communication feels like a trap. The silence that follows is not them punishing you. It is them protecting themselves. They are covering their ears. The noise of your anxiety is simply too loud for them to process. They ghost you because they do not know how to de-escalate the intensity you have brought to the table. They sense that a simple reply will not be enough. They sense that if they give you an inch, the vacuum of your need will try to take a mile. So they choose the only option that guarantees the noise will stop. They choose silence. They choose to sever the connection, not because they are malicious, but because the pressure coming from your end of the line was overwhelming. You must understand that this mechanism is purely cause and effect. It is physics of the mind, action and reaction. It has nothing to do with your worth as a human being. It has everything to do with the signal you are broadcasting. You were screaming for love, but the volume was so high that it sounded like aggression. This realization is painful, but it is also the beginning of your power. If the scream pushed them away, then silence, true internal silence, is what draws them back. But you cannot fake this silence. You cannot perform it. You cannot wait 40 minutes and pretend you do not care while your heart races. You have to actually lower the volume. You have to sever the tether yourself. When you stop screaming, the air clears, the pressure lifts, and suddenly, for the first time in a long time, there is space for them to step forward. Chapter 3. The Receiver's Instinct. Now we must cross the invisible divide. We have spent enough time sitting in the deafening silence of your room, staring at the lit screen of a phone that refuses to buzz. We have analyzed the scream rising in your chest, but to understand the silence, we must leave your perspective behind. We have to travel through the ether and materialize in the room of the person who left. We need to inhabit the mind of the receiver. Imagine the person you are thinking of right now. They are going about their day. Perhaps they are driving, or sitting in a meeting, or laughing at a joke over dinner. On the surface, their world looks normal. But underneath the mundane routine, something feels off. They feel a sudden, inexplicable heaviness. It is not a headache, and it is not fatigue. It is a subtle intrusion, a low-frequency hum of anxiety that does not belong to them. This is the receiver's instinct kicking in. Humans are social animals, evolved over millions of years to detect threats and shifts in their tribe's emotional state. We often mistake communication for words, thinking that if we do not send the text, we have not sent the message. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how human connection works. We are constantly broadcasting. When you are sitting in that state of high-voltage anxiety, vibrating with the desperate need for a reply, you are essentially turning yourself into a beacon. The person on the other end picks up on this signal. They might not consciously know why they feel sudden resistance toward you. They might not look at their phone and think, "Oh, I bet they are spiraling right now." It is far more primal than that. It is a gut feeling. It is the instinctual recoil one feels when a stranger stands too close in an empty elevator. Let us look at the mechanics of this recoil. When you project that intense need for validation, that telepathic scream we discussed earlier, it arrives at the receiver not as a request for connection, but as a demand for energy. It feels like a debt. When they see your name pop up, or even when they just think of you during a quiet moment, they do not feel the lightness of attraction. They feel the weight of obligation. The receiver's instinct is primarily a defensive mechanism. In the wild, if an animal senses desperation in another, it signals instability. Instability is dangerous. It suggests that the drowning swimmer is about to pull the lifeguard down with them. When you are transmitting that frequency of lack, of needing them to complete you or soothe you, their subconscious mind creates a wall. This is not malice. It is not because they are evil or cold or heartless. It is the physics of emotional survival. Think about the way magnets behave. When you turn them the wrong way, the force pushing them apart is invisible, yet it is undeniably strong. You cannot force them together. The harder you push, the more violent the slip becomes when they finally slide past each other. Your anxiety reverses the polarity of the relationship. You are pushing with the force of your need, and their instinct is to slide away to find neutral ground. This explains the paradox that confuses so many people. You might ask yourself why they seemed so interested when you were busy, distracted, and barely paying attention to them. Back then, your signal was clear. You were self-contained. You were a mystery to be solved, not a problem to be fixed. There was no screaming demand for their attention, so they felt safe to approach. They felt the vacuum of your indifference and were drawn in to fill it. But the moment the dynamic shifted, the moment you became the one waiting, the signal inverted. Now, instead of a vacuum, you are creating pressure. The air around you, even from miles away, feels thick to them. They hesitate to text back because they know, on a visceral level, that one response will not be enough. They can feel the hunger on the other side of the connection. They know that if they feed that hunger with a single hello, it will only demand more. So they do the only thing that feels safe. They retreat. They go silent. They ghost. It is an attempt to reclaim their own equilibrium. They are trying to turn down the volume of the noise you are inadvertently blasting in their direction. Understanding this is painful, but it is also the first step toward regaining your power. You must realize that their silence is not a judgment on your worth as a human being. It is a reaction to the intensity of the signal you are broadcasting. The receiver's instinct is simply a mirror. It is reflecting your own internal state back to you. If you are screaming for them to save you, they will run. If you are standing firm in your own reality, grounded and self-sufficient, their instinct will no longer tell them to flee. The pressure lifts. The repelling force dissipates. And only then, in the quiet space that follows, can a true signal be heard again. The masquerade of chill.
Let us examine the costume you wore during those critical days. It was tailored to perfection. You called it being chill. You called it playing it cool. To the outside observer, you were the picture of nonchalance. You were the person who simply had too much going on to worry about a text message. You placed your phone face down on the coffee table with the deliberate care of a bomb disposal expert. You decided that waiting 3 hours to respond was the tactical move. It was the strategy of the unbothered. But let us look beneath the mask. While your thumbs were still and your phone lay dark on the table, your internal reality was a riot. You were not relaxing. You were vibrating. Every minute that ticked by on the clock was an exercise in agonizing discipline. You were white-knuckling your way through the silence. You were creating a performance of indifference, while your entire nervous system was screaming for connection. This is the masquerade. It is the great lie we tell ourselves when we are terrified of losing someone. We believe that if we can just mimic the behaviors of someone who is secure, then we will become secure. We think that if we type fewer words or wait longer to hit send, we are successfully hiding the magnitude of our need. You thought you were hiding. You thought the walls of your apartment contained your anxiety. You believed that because you did not send the double text, the other person remained oblivious to your desperation. This is the fundamental error. This is where the material reality of human connection defies the simple logic of data transmission. Communication is not just the exchange of digital packets. It is the exchange of states. Think about the sheer amount of psychological energy required to maintain that facade. You were spending hours analyzing the syntax of a single sentence. You drafted responses in your Notes app to ensure they sounded breezy and effortless. You consulted friends to calibrate the tone. You were working harder on that text message than you worked at your actual job. That effort has a weight. It has a density. When you finally pressed send, that little gray bubble did not just carry the words, "Hey, how was your day?" It carried the heavy, oppressive cargo of the 3 hours you spent agonizing over it. This is the telepathic scream. It is not magic. It is the visceral leakage of your internal state into the external world. Humans are apex predators of social intuition.
We have spent hundreds of thousands of years evolving to read the slightest shifts in posture and tone and timing. We are hardwired to detect incongruence. When there is a mismatch between your actions and your energy, the receiver feels a sense of unease. They might not be able to articulate it intellectually. They might not say to themselves that you seem anxious, but their instinct kicks in. Your anxiety acted like a high-frequency signal. It was a dog whistle that only the receiver's subconscious could hear. While you were proud of your restraint for waiting 4 hours, they did not feel the space you gave them. They felt the pressure you were exerting to keep that space open. They felt the tension of a coiled spring. The masquerade of chill is actually a form of dishonesty. You are presenting a version of yourself that does not exist. You are pretending to be independent when you feel dependent. You are pretending to be busy when you are waiting. This dishonesty creates a dissonance in the connection. The other person feels like they are interacting with a wall rather than a window. They sense that something is being withheld. They sense the heavy breathing behind the curtain. When you are truly chill, you do not count the minutes. You do not strategize. You forget the phone exists because you are absorbed in your own life. That is a low-pressure state. But when you are performing the masquerade, you are in a high-pressure state. You are a pressure cooker with a lid clamped down tight. And eventually, that pressure seeks an outlet. It traveled through the invisible tether we discussed earlier.
It turned your casual check-in into a demand for validation. It turned your silence into a loud expectation. The receiver felt the weight of your focus on them. It feels like being watched. It feels like being hunted. Even though you were sitting on your hands to keep from reaching out, your mind was grasping at them. Your attention was a spotlight that never turned off. This is why the masquerade failed. You cannot fake a frequency. You cannot mimic a vibration. The anxiety you were suppressing was so loud that it drowned out the words you were typing. You were screaming, "I need you. I need this. I am terrified," across the silent gap between your phones. And they heard it. They heard it loud and clear. Their instinct to pull away was not a reaction to what you did. It was a reaction to who you were being in that moment. It was a reaction to the masquerade itself. They sensed the trap of your unspoken expectations, and they did what any free creature would do. They looked for the exit. Chapter 5. Suffocating the Flame. Imagine a small campfire flickering in the deep woods. It is a fragile thing, a spark that has just caught onto the kindling. It provides a gentle warmth and a mesmerizing light. Your instinct, when you see something this precious and precarious, is to protect it. You want to shield it from the wind. You want to nurture it. So you cup your hands around it. You lean in close. You hover over it with an intensity born of fear. You are terrified that if you look away, or if you let the wind touch it, the fire will die. But in your frantic attempt to keep it safe, you cut off the one thing it needs to survive: oxygen. You smother it. The flame does not die because it wanted to leave you. It dies because you suffocated it. This is the mechanism behind the silence that now haunts your phone. We call it ghosting, but that implies a passive disappearance. What actually occurred was an active suffocation. You did not simply wait for a text. You broadcasted a frequency of intense, suffocating need. You might believe that your anxiety is a private experience, confined to the electrical storms within your own skull. You think that if you do not type out the double text, or if you force yourself to wait 3 hours before hitting send, you have successfully hidden your desperation. You are mistaken. There is a form of communication that predates language. It is the primal, biological radar that every human being possesses. It is the ability to sense a threat in the tall grass, or to feel the weight of eyes watching from the shadows. When you are fixated on a person, when your entire emotional stability for the day hinges on their validation, you are projecting a massive amount of psychological weight. You are screaming across the void. This is not magic. It is not mystical energy. It is the heavy, undeniable subtext of your interaction. Think about the text you sent. On the surface, it might have been a casual question about their day or a funny meme. It looked harmless. But underneath those pixels lay a heavy cargo. You were not just asking about their day. You were asking them to reassure you that you still exist. You were asking them to regulate your nervous system. You were handing them a responsibility they never agreed to carry. People are intuitive creatures. Even through the sterile medium of a screen, they can feel the difference between a message sent by someone who is busy living a fulfilling life and a message sent by someone
who has been staring at a blank screen for 45 minutes. The former feels light. It feels like an invitation to play. The latter feels like a demand. It feels like a debt collection. When you operate from this state of hidden panic, you turn the dynamic into a hostage situation. You are the captor, holding your own happiness at gunpoint, waiting for them to pay the ransom of attention. And they can feel it. They receive the message, and instantly, their survival instinct kicks in. They feel the heaviness. They feel the pressure to perform, to soothe, to fill the bottomless pit of your anxiety. This is where the flame flickers and dies. Attraction requires space. It requires mystery. It needs the oxygen of uncertainty to burn bright. When you are mentally obsessing over them, you are filling the entire room with your presence. There is no space left for them to wonder about you. There is no space for them to miss you. You are already there, looming over them telepathically, suffocating the very interest you are trying to ignite. The tragedy is that you were likely pretending to be chill. You wore the mask of the casual observer. But the human animal is an expert at detecting a counterfeit. They heard the scream behind the silence. They felt the grip of your anxiety tightening around the interaction. Their retreat was not an act of malice. It was an act of self-preservation. They stepped back to find air.
They stepped back because the intensity of your silent demand was crushing the delicate potential of what might have been. You wanted to keep the fire alive, but in your terror of losing it, you consumed all the air in the room. And now, you are left in the cold, holding nothing but the memory of warmth and the scent of smoke. Chapter 6. The Retreat into Silence. It ends not with a confrontation, but with a void. You are left staring at a screen that has become a black mirror reflecting your own disintegration. This is the retreat into silence. It is the final act of a play where one character suddenly walked off stage and left the other reciting lines to an empty theater. You replay the last interactions. You dissect the syntax of your final messages. You check the timestamps. You tell yourself that you played it cool. You tell yourself you waited the appropriate amount of time to respond. You tell yourself you were casual. But deep down, you know the truth. You were not casual. You were screaming. You might argue that you never raised your voice. You might say you never sent a double text. You might insist that your words were perfectly crafted to appear indifferent. But human communication is only partially verbal. The rest is a transmission of intent. It is a broadcast of emotional state. When you are consumed by anxiety and when you are terrified of loss, you emit a signal that is impossible to mask with emojis or delayed replies. This is the telepathic scream. It is a soundless alarm that rings in the mind of the receiver. Imagine the dynamic from their perspective. They are going about their day. They are navigating their own stresses and their own mundane realities. Then, your message arrives. On the surface, it reads like a simple greeting or a funny observation. But attached to those digital bytes is a heavy, invisible payload. It carries the weight of your expectation. It carries the density of your fear. You were not just saying hello. You were asking to be saved. You were demanding validation. You were pleading for them to regulate your nervous system because you could not do it yourself. People are intuitive creatures. We are evolved to sense danger and instability. We can feel when someone is hungry. We can feel when someone is angry. And we can feel when someone is desperate. That desperation acts like a repelling force. It is a high-pitched frequency that makes the listener want to cover their ears and run. The more you tried to suppress it, the louder it became. The masquerade of chill you performed
did not fool them. It only created a dissonance. Your words said one thing, but your energy screamed another. That dissonance is unsettling. It creates a feeling of being hunted. So they retreated. They did not ghost you because they are evil. They did not ghost you because they enjoyed hurting you. They ghosted you because the noise was too loud. They pulled back to protect their own peace. When someone feels that psychic weight pressing down on them, their instinct is not to engage. Their instinct is to escape. Every time you checked your phone, hoping for a reply, you sent another pulse of that anxious energy down the line. You were tightening the invisible tether, and they could feel the constriction around their neck.
The silence they offered in return was not a punishment. It was a shield. They needed to sever the connection to stop the screaming. They needed to find a place where they were not responsible for your emotional survival. It is a brutal realization to accept that your affection felt like an attack. It is painful to admit that your desire for connection manifested as a demand for surrender. But this is the mechanics of the retreat. You became a source of pressure rather than a source of pleasure. In the early days, the connection was light. It was easy. It flowed. But as your anxiety mounted, the flow turned into a torrent. You began to treat them not as a separate human being with their own autonomy, but as the sole solution to your internal emptiness. That is a burden no person can carry for long. Eventually, they collapse under the weight, or they drop the load and walk away. This is the hard truth of the telepathic explanation. You pushed them away with the very hands you used to try and hold them close. The scream of your anxiety drowned out the whispers of romance. Now the silence is all that remains. It is heavy and it is cold. But it is also instructive. It tells you that the next time you reach out to someone, you must do so with a quiet mind. You must come to them already whole. You must ensure that your presence feels like a gift and not like a demand. Until then, the silence will persist. It is the echo of your own scream returning to you. It is the sound of a lesson waiting to be learned. The echo chamber. You are standing in the center of a vast and windowless room. This is the space that now exists between you and the person who walked away. To the naked eye, this space looks like simple distance. It looks like a lack of text messages or a silence on the other end of the telephone line. But you know better. You know that this space is not empty at all. It is thick with the noise of your own panic. It is dense with the static of unresolved questions. This is the echo chamber. When the silence first hit, you did not sit still. Physically, you might have remained on your couch. You might have held your phone with a steady hand, resisting the urge to type out a demand for closure. But internally, you were screaming. This was not a sound made with vocal cords. It was a broadcasting of pure, unadulterated need. You were projecting a signal so loud and so chaotic that it seemed to defy the laws of physics to bridge the gap between two minds. We often mistake silence for a lack of action. We assume that if we are not speaking, we are not communicating. This is the great error of the anxious mind. In the audiobook of your life, this chapter is not characterized by what you said, but by how loudly you felt. Imagine them for a moment. They are miles away, perhaps sitting in a cafe or driving home from work. They are going about the routine of their Tuesday evening. Suddenly, they stop. They feel a weight land on their shoulders. It is not heavy enough to crush them, but it is heavy enough to make them shift in their seat. It is a vague sense of unease. They check their phone and see nothing from you.
no missed calls, no long paragraphs explaining your feelings, yet they feel you. They feel the demand of your attention pulling at them like a relentless tide. This is the telepathy of anxiety. It travels through the invisible tether of emotional attachment. It is the psychological pressure of expectation. You are transmitting a frequency of desperation that rings in their subconscious like tinnitus. Here is where the tragedy compounds. You interpret their continued silence as indifference. This terrifies you, so you ramp up the signal. You think about them harder. You check their social media status to see when they were last active. You replay the last conversation you had, looking for the hidden code that explains why you are suddenly unworthy. Every single one of these thoughts adds decibels to the silent scream you are directing at them.
You are turning the volume knob to the right until it threatens to break off in your hand. The room you are standing in begins to vibrate. Your anxiety hits the walls of their boundaries and bounces back at you. This is the echo. It returns to you as confirmation of your worst fears. You think they are ignoring you because they despise you. In reality, they are retreating because the noise is deafening. Even if you have not sent a single text message, the energy you are emitting is suffocating. It is a paradox of human connection that we can chase someone away while sitting perfectly still. Let us look at the mechanics of this phenomenon without the mysticism. When you are in a state of high anxiety, your behavior changes in subtle ways. If you do reach out, the tone is laced with a subtext of desperation that repels them. If you do not reach out, your silence feels like a loaded weapon waiting to go off. They can sense that you are waiting. The human animal is incredibly perceptive when it comes to being hunted. And make no mistake, that is what this is. You are hunting for reassurance. You are hunting for dopamine. You are hunting for a restoration of the self-worth you believe they took with them. So they build a wall. They do this not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. The louder your internal state becomes, the higher their wall goes. They are trying to block out the noise. They are trying to find a quiet place where they do not feel the crushing weight of your expectations. Every time you check your phone, hoping for a notification, you are essentially knocking on that wall and demanding to be let in.
You are asking them to manage your emotional state. You are asking them to silence the screaming in your own head because you have forgotten how to do it yourself. The echo chamber is a trap. As long as you stay inside it, screaming for an answer, you will only hear your own panic reflected back at you. The silence from them will continue, because silence is the only defense against a noise that will not cease. You believe you are waiting for them to return, but in truth, they are waiting for you to stop screaming. They are waiting for the air to clear. They are waiting for the moment when the invisible tether goes slack, and they can breathe again without inhaling your fear. Until you step out of this chamber and quiet the storm within your own mind, the door remains locked from the other side. Chapter 8. Lowering the volume.
You stand now at the precipice of a necessary silence. We have explored the mechanics of the scream and walked through the halls of the echo chamber where your anxiety amplified every fear into a deafening roar. You understand now that your internal state is not a contained secret, but a broadcast signal. The sheer intensity of your need for reassurance has acted as a repellent force. It pushed against the very person you sought to draw close. Now we arrive at the most critical juncture of this psychological architecture. It is time to touch the dial on the mixing board of your emotional output. It is time to lower the volume.
This process begins not with an action directed at them, but with a cessation of the internal war within you. Lowering the volume is not a strategy of manipulation. It is not about playing cool or feigning indifference while your insides burn with the same frantic heat. That is merely another form of the masquerade we discussed earlier. True volume reduction is biological and absolute. It requires you to physically and mentally unclench the grasp you have maintained on the situation. Imagine for a moment the sensation of holding a heavy rope in a game of tug-of-war. Your muscles are taut, and your knuckles are white, and your heels are dug into the mud. You are exhausted. The person on the other end feels every ounce of your tension. They are braced against you because you are pulling. To lower the volume, you simply drop the rope. You do not gently set it down. You release it. You let it fall into the mud between you. In that instant of release, the tension vanishes from the line. The person on the other end stumbles back, not because you pushed them, but because the resistance they were fighting has suddenly evaporated. This is the physical equivalent of the telepathic shift we are aiming for. When you stop pulling psychologically, you stop feeding the dynamic of pursuit and retreat. The frantic energy that screamed demand is replaced by a stillness that feels foreign to you. You might feel a surge of panic when you first attempt this. Your mind will insist that if you stop broadcasting, they will forget you exist. Your anxiety will whisper that the noise was the only thing keeping the connection alive. This is a lie born of insecurity. The noise was not a bridge, it was a barrier. By lowering the volume, you are not disappearing. You are becoming solid. You are becoming a person defined by their own center of gravity, rather than an orbiting satellite desperate for a signal. The act of lowering the volume requires a redirection of focus so complete that it changes your physiological signature. You must turn your gaze away from the void where they used to be and look at the life you neglected while you were busy screaming. This is where the secular mechanics of attention come into play. A human mind consumed by obsession is a chaotic and loud environment. A human mind engaged in purpose and self-development is quiet and potent. When you truly lower the volume, you reclaim the energy you were hemorrhaging. You take that intense focus and apply it to your health and your finances and your intellect. You stop checking the phone, not because you are trying to trick them, but because you are actually busy building something else. You stop analyzing their last text because your mind is occupied with a complex problem in your own reality. This shift creates a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. When the telepathic pressure of your need is removed, the other person feels a sudden change in the atmosphere. The repellent force is gone. The wind stops howling. In the sudden quiet, they are no longer on the defensive. They are no longer instinctively running because there is nothing chasing them. Curiosity is a fragile plant that cannot grow in a storm. By stopping the storm, you create the conditions where curiosity can finally take root. You must understand that this silence is not empty. It is heavy with presence. It is the silence of a mountain rather than the silence of a void. It conveys strength. It signals that you are no longer a victim of your own emotions. You have become the master of your own frequency. You have turned the dial down not to zero, but to a hum of steady self-assurance. The scream has ended. The desperation has been metabolized into action. You are no longer broadcasting a plea for validation into the ether. You are simply existing in your own right. This is the most attractive state a human being can inhabit. It is the state of total self-possession. As the noise fades, you will find that the air clears. The frantic static of 9:03 p.m. is replaced by the calm rhythm of a life that is fully yours again. You have lowered the volume, and in doing so, you have finally made it possible for something else to be heard. Chapter 9. The Sound of Autonomy. Imagine a room where a massive industrial fan has been whirring at top speed for days. The noise is constant. It is a low-grade abrasion against the senses. You might get used to it after a while, but your body remains tense. Your shoulders are tight. Your mind is cluttered by the drone. Now imagine someone walks over and pulls the plug. The blades slow down. The humming fades. Finally, there is silence. That sudden quiet is not just the absence of noise. It is a physical sensation. You can feel your muscles relax. You can hear your own thoughts again. The air feels clearer. This is exactly what happens on the other end of the line when you finally cut the cord of your anxiety. This is the sound of autonomy. Throughout this exploration, we have discussed the telepathic scream. We identified that specific, high-pitched frequency of neediness that sends people running. It is the invisible alarm that rings in their pocket every time you think about them with desperation. But now we must examine the counter-signal. We must look at the broadcast that replaces that scream when you truly regain your center. Autonomy is often mistaken for coldness or indifference. In the world of modern dating strategies, people are often taught to feign autonomy. They are told to wait 3 hours before texting back, or to pretend they have plans when they are actually sitting at home, staring at the ceiling. But this is not autonomy. That is just anxiety wearing a costume. It is a masquerade. The telepathic signal remains the same. You are still broadcasting waiting energy. You are still screaming, only now you are doing it with a pillow over your face. True autonomy sounds different. It has a weight to it. It is the acoustic signature of a person who is structurally sound. When you are genuinely autonomous, your emotional stability is not outsourced. You are not looking for a host to feed on. You are a self-sustaining ecosystem. When you shift into this state, the telepathic dynamic changes instantly. The person who ghosted you, the one who fled from the deafening noise of your hidden expectations, suddenly feels the line go slack. The invisible tether drops. They stop feeling the tug of your demand. This is where human instinct takes a fascinating turn. When the pressure to respond is removed, the natural curiosity of the human mind begins to reboot. Remember that they ran because they felt hunted. They felt the predator of your anxiety tracking their every move. But autonomy signals safety. It tells their subconscious mind that you are fine. It tells them that you are not a drowning person looking for a life raft. You are a ship sailing your own course. The sound of autonomy is a deep, resonant hum. It is attractive in the literal sense of the word. It creates a gravitational field. Think about the physics of social interaction. Needing someone pushes them away. It is a propulsive force. Being whole within yourself draws people in. It is an attractive force. When you stop projecting the question, "Am I good enough for you?" the static clears. You stop asking for permission to exist. You simply exist. This is a radical shift in the telepathic conversation. Before, your silence was heavy with waiting. It felt like a loaded gun. Now your silence is peaceful. It is the silence of a library or a forest. It is a space where someone might actually want to rest. This is the only frequency that can reverse the momentum of a ghosting situation. You cannot talk them back into your life. You cannot logic them into attraction. You certainly cannot guilt them into connection. Those are all forms of noise. Those are all variations of the scream. The only thing that penetrates the wall they have built is the realization that the wall is no longer necessary. They built the wall to keep out the noise. When the noise stops, the wall becomes obsolete. To embody the sound of autonomy, you must genuinely divest your well-being from their validation. This is not a trick. It is a fundamental restructuring of your reality. You must reach a point where your internal narrative is so compelling that their absence is merely a subplot, not the climax of your story. When you achieve this, you stop broadcasting interference. You become a clear channel. The frantic urgency dissipates. In its place, you transmit a signal of high value and self-respect. You are no longer the fan whirring in the corner, demanding to be heard. You are the quiet confidence of the room itself. And it is only in this quiet, in this profound and solid autonomy, that the other person can finally feel safe enough to turn around and look for you. Chapter 10. The Resonance of Release. There is a specific frequency that emits from a person who has genuinely stopped waiting. It is not a sound you can hear with your ears, but it is a signal that is felt with absolute clarity by everyone around you. This is the resonance of release. It is the final and most critical movement in the symphony of silence we have been exploring. To understand it, we must look at what happens when the internal screaming finally stops. Throughout this journey, we have examined how your anxiety acted as a telepathic shout. We looked at how your fear of abandonment created a deafening noise that pushed the other person away. You learned that your attempts to appear chill were merely a masquerade, and underneath the mask, the receiver could still feel the heat of your desperation. But now, having lowered the volume and reclaimed your autonomy, you arrive at the threshold of release. Release is not the same as giving up. Giving up is an act of defeat, usually accompanied by bitterness or resignation. Release is an act of power. It is a deliberate decision to unclench your mental fist.
Imagine the dynamic between you and the one who ghosted you as a physical tether. For weeks, perhaps even months, you have been pulling on your end of the rope. You called it love. You called it concern. You called it a need for closure. But to the person on the other end, it was tension. It was constant, unyielding, mechanical tension. They braced their feet against the ground and pulled away. Not necessarily because they despised you, but because the physics of the situation demanded a counterweight. As long as you pulled, they had to pull back just to maintain their balance. Then comes the moment of release. You drop the rope. You do not throw it in anger. You do not cut it in spite. You simply open your hand. The immediate consequence is physical. The person on the other end, who was leaning all their weight away from you to counter your pulling, suddenly loses that resistance. They stumble. The tension they were fighting vanishes instantly. The game of tug-of-war ends because one player has chosen to leave the field. This physical metaphor translates perfectly to the psychological realm. When you truly let go, the telepathic pressure you were exerting evaporates. This is often the precise moment when the ghost reappears. You have likely heard stories of people who finally moved on, only to have their ex reach out the very next day. This is not magic. It is not a cosmic trick. It is the mechanics of pressure and release. When you were grasping, you were consuming the oxygen in the room, even from miles away. Your anxiety was a demand. You were demanding reassurance, demanding attention, demanding validation. That demand traveled through the invisible channels of human pattern recognition and memory. When you release, you stop demanding. You become self-sustaining. The signal you broadcast changes from a high-pitched alarm of scarcity
to a deep, resonant hum of sufficiency. This is the resonance of release. It creates a vacuum. Human curiosity is drawn to vacuums. When you are no longer broadcasting your location and your emotional state every second of the day, you become a mystery again. You become a person with a private inner world, rather than a person whose inner world is entirely dependent on an external response. The receiver feels this shift. They feel the silence, but this time, the silence is not heavy with expectation. In the past, your silence was a weapon or a tactic. You were quiet,
But you were checking your phone every 3 minutes. You were quiet, but you were mentally screaming for them to notice you. That is a loaded silence. The resonance of release is an empty silence. It is light. It is airy. It carries no hidden agenda. It signals to the other person that they are no longer being hunted. When the predator stops chasing, the prey stops running. They stop and look back. They wonder why the pursuit has ended. They wonder what you found that was more interesting than them. This is the irony of autonomy. By finding your own center and releasing your attachment to the outcome, you become the most attractive version of yourself. You are no longer a vessel waiting to be filled. You are a complete entity. This state is difficult to fake.
You cannot pretend to release someone while secretly hoping it brings them back. That is just another form of manipulation, and the signal will remain distorted. True release happens when you accept that you will be okay regardless of whether they return. It is the profound realization that your emotional stability is not a collaborative project. It is a solo endeavor. As you settle into this new frequency, you will find that the air around you clears. The mental fog of obsession lifts. You are no longer projecting a telepathic scream of neediness. Instead, you are projecting a calm, steady signal of self-possession. This is the only signal that invites genuine connection. It creates a safe space where interaction can happen voluntarily, rather than out of obligation or guilt. The ghosting was a reaction to the noise. The return, if it happens, will be a response to the music of your own life, playing on its own terms. You have stopped banging on the door. You have turned around and walked back into your own house. And in doing so, you have finally become a person worth visiting. This is the resonance of release. It is the sound of you finally returning to yourself. Epilogue. The quiet magnetism. Now that you have finally lowered the volume, the static clears. You are no longer projecting a desperate need for validation across the invisible wire. Instead, you have cultivated a profound silence. This is where the final transformation takes root. True magnetism is not about aggressive pursuit or intricate mind games. It is the direct result of self-containment. When you stop mentally screaming for their attention, you create a vacuum.
Human nature abhors a vacuum, and their instinct creates a sudden curiosity to fill that space. You become attractive simply because you are no longer broadcasting fear. You are grounded in your own reality. You are busy living a life that satisfies you, regardless of who is watching. The signal you now send is one of stability and peace. This is the quiet confidence that turns the dynamic around. You are no longer a hunter starving for a connection. You are the destination. You are not waiting for a text to determine your worth. You are moving forward with purpose. That is the only frequency they will ever want to tune into.